So today we are going to be learning about health outcomes, mental health outcomes in the outdoors and nature. And we're learning specifically from someone who studied this as part of his PhD program. And so Dr. Brent Jackson is a professor from Florida Gulf Coast University. He's an instructor in the Department of Integrated Studies at Florida Gulf Coast University. His research and teaching interests include environmental education, the human dimensions of natural resource, and conservation biology. He received his bachelor's and master's from Florida Gulf Coast University and his PhD from North Carolina State University. I'm so grateful for him because I will tell you the way that he's on our series today is I was looking for some latest research on this particular subject to be able to share with our team. And I saw his really great paper that was just published. And I just kind of reached out and I said, would you like to be a speaker for the series? And it was it was amazing because he was excited. He said, absolutely. I was really surprised by that. So Dr. Brent Jackson, I really appreciate you taking the time today to speak to us in Nebraska. And go ahead. It's all yours. Take it away. And we're excited to learn from you.
Great. And I'm going to share my screen here.
Okay.
All right. Can y'all see that? Perfect.
Yeah, it looks great.
Well, thank you so much for having me today. This is a topic that I'm really excited about. In a lot of ways, my trajectory in life has been shaped by this type of work. So as a kid, I spent a lot of time outdoors, and I'm sure a lot of you had similar experiences. And that led me to kind of pursue fields related to the natural world. So I first got into biology, and then I really wanted to understand how people develop this relationship with nature and kind of the benefits of a relationship with nature. So that's what I'm going to speak on today. As Amber mentioned, I'm at Florida Gulf Coast University, but a lot of this work started at North Carolina State University, where I got my PhD. So you see I have both logos there. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. If you have questions or comments, feel free to use the chat, and I'll be sharing some information through the chat towards the end of the presentation as well. So nature and human well-being, lessons from the COVID-19 pandemic. So nature has a lot of ties to human health, and they're often things that get overlooked. We know that natural systems provide the means for our survival. Things like ecosystem services, so pollination, crop production, soil retention, heat mitigation. These are all things that are really important for making sure the resources we use are available and continue to be available and making life possible for us. But nature also plays a really important role in our well-being, keeping us healthy, keeping us physically and mentally healthy. So that's what I really wanted to focus on. And there's a lot of different ways that nature can impact our health. And I'm going to kind of narrow down to some specific things that my research focused on. Before we do that, though, I'd kind of like to get a feel from you. How does spending time outdoors benefit you? If you had to think about the time that you spend outside and the benefits you reap from that time outside, what are those benefits? And what type of activities do you engage in to kind of reap those benefits? And I can kick this off. For me, there are a lot of things that I really enjoy doing. I really enjoy going out for bike rides. I'm a big hiker, and I also really enjoy gardening. And for the longest time, I just thought these were things I enjoyed. But as I've gotten older and life gets more stressful for certain situations, I found that these are essential to kind of maintaining that well-being. So take a look in the chat if folks feel like sharing. All right. So benefits, Jamie mentioned that it's calming, kind of puts you in the present, and it's a grounding effect. Feeling recharged brings peace and serenity. Amber mentioned gardening and hiking as well, exploring as a family, connection with family and grounding again, nature walks with my kids. These are all things that I totally am on board with and things that I totally agree with as well. I'm a new parent, and getting my kids outside I find is really beneficial for them, but me as well. Looking for plants and insects, better sense of purpose. Yeah, these are great ways that getting outside actually benefits us. And so I'm glad to see that a lot of folks have had these experiences. So I'm going to build on that idea of these benefits. There's a lot of benefits associated with spending time outdoors. The benefits are numerous and profound, but there are two that I really want to focus on today. One of them is the development of pro-environmental attitudes and behaviors. The environmental education movement really was founded because of this benefit. So we wanted to get kids outside And we wanted them to kind of develop these attitudes and behaviors that lent themselves to improving and taking care of the natural world. And there's been a lot of research that really focuses in on that. And it's not as emergent as the next category, which is what I'm going to focus on today, which is improved physical and mental well-being. This is kind of a new field in terms of research, but it's something anecdotally we've known for a really long time. For many of you, probably when you were children or kids, your parents would say, oh, get outside and play, it's good for you. At least in my own experiences, my parents did not want us in the house, they wanted us outside playing. And that really shaped my trajectory in life. And I'm sure a lot of you can probably agree with that. So what are the factors that, or aspects of nature that really contribute to improved well-being? There are a lot of different pieces to this puzzle. So one of them is improved environmental conditions. So when we go outside, we're exposed to improved air quality. We have shade from trees, heat mitigation. Just it's a pleasant place to be. And the environmental factors are a huge part of that. Another piece is when we go outside, we're actually more likely to engage in physical activities, which we know is really good for our physical health, but also our mental health. So increase physical activity for folks that get outside, and then increase social interaction as well. A lot of social integration and social learning happens outdoors with friends on the playground when you're a kid, and that continues across the lifespan. And then finally, exposure to nature itself, which exposes you to those improved environmental conditions, but there are a few other pieces to that as well. And that's something that I'm really going to focus on. So I mentioned that this is an emergent field. There's a lot of new research in the past decade or so that's come out on this topic. So I have a few kind of clips of titles of some of the research that's come out in the past few years that shaped some of my work. So the power of green schoolyards as havens from stress and resources for resilience in childhood and adolescence. Clinic and park partnerships for childhood resilience. Nearby nature as a buffer of life stress. These are things that we're learning more and more about. And the more we learn, the more we realize that these are really powerful tools for improving well-being, particularly for children. And so organizations are starting to kind of jump on this bandwagon, realizing just how powerful this can be as a public health tool and as a means of addressing a lot of the issues we're facing. So the infographic I have up here is from Parks RX America. Some of you may be familiar with this. They are working to prescribe nature. So maybe you've heard the term vitamin N. I know a few years ago, Outside Magazine had, the next miracle drug is here and it's free. And they were referring to nature. So this is a growing kind of theme. And this idea of prescribing nature for well-being actually originated in Japan with the term Shinrin Yoku, which translates to forest bathing. So getting out in nature and just reaping the benefits to get those well-being aspects. And so some of the benefits you can see from this infographic, again, increased physical activity, improved weight, blood pressure, and overall health, helps children become more social and resilient, improves children's school grades and behavior, lowers anxiety and depression. And these are just a few of the pieces to that overall well-being puzzle. So really cool what Parks RX America is doing, and they're growing bigger and bigger. And one of the pieces to this also is helping people find these parks. So you might go to your doctor, and if it's a participating doctor, they may actually tell you, well, this is within the range of where you live. I'm going to suggest that you spend 20 minutes there 3 times a week. And the results have been really beneficial. And not to say that modern medicine isn't really effective as well, but sometimes taking a pill isn't the first thing that we should jump to, and getting outside can address those without jumping on that medication bandwagon. And it turns out that adolescence is a really important developmental stage for this. So, and the reason for that is that a lot of trends are established during adolescence that persist across the lifespan. So for one, recreation behaviors. If you engage in recreation behaviors as a child, you're actually more likely to engage in those behaviors later in life. Same with social integration and social behaviors. If you engage socially with kids on the playground and things like that, you're more likely to be social later in life as well. And then I already mentioned environmental attitudes and behaviors. These are things that develop at a young age. They start to shape your worldview. and there's something that solidifies. So once you're an adult, it's really hard to change those environmental attitudes and behaviors, which is why there's a lot of focus on environmental education for youth. And then finally, connection to nature, probably a term you've heard before. It's essentially a psychological relationship with nature. And this is something that has been a big part of my research and something I'm going to focus on today. But these are a few of those reasons why adolescence is such an important developmental stage. So for connection to nature, the last piece, it develops during youth and again, has that trajectory across the lifespan. There are negative things that can accrue from childhood experiences as well. So things like increased levels of stress during childhood actually predispose you to greater levels of stress later in life and can predispose you to stress-related ailments later in life as well. So can impact your physical and mental health. Check the chat right here, see how we're doing. Yes, Jamie, I didn't include any citations in the actual presentation. So at the end, I'm actually going to link some open access resources where you can actually find all of this and where to find things. So I will definitely have that out there.
Thank you.
So these outcomes I've mentioned are really important, particularly if they're outcomes that persist across the lifespan. Having these equitable approaches that improve science literacy, environmental literacy, and health and well-being are really important to addressing and coping with issues our society is facing. Things like a changing climate, global pandemics, social unrest, these are all tied to these outcomes. So if we can establish these outcomes in kids later in life, we're going to be able to address these issues better. So let's talk a little bit about that connection to nature piece that I mentioned. It's actually defined as a cognitive, affective, and experiential relationship with nature. What that means is thinking about nature, caring about nature, and just spending time in nature. And as I mentioned, this is something that develops during youth, so when you're a child, and it usually develops through what we refer to as significant life experiences. So these are experiences with a parent or a family member or family friend when you're a young child that really stick with you for the rest of your life. And probably most of you can think about an experience that you had when you were a young kid that's really had a profound impact on your life today and might be one of the reasons you do what you do today. Again, this is something that persists across the lifespan. So if you develop this connection to nature at a young age, it will benefit you later in life. It's also a motivator for spending more time outside. So it develops through spending time outside, and it's kind of a positive feedback loop. So the more time you spend outside, the more you want to spend more time outside. And again, it results in improved environmental attitudes and behaviors. And there's research coming out now, including what I'm going to share with you today, that really ties this concept of connection to nature, this psychological relationship with the natural world, to increased well-being and resilience. So one of the reasons that I was really interested in this concept of connection to nature and the well-being benefits of time in nature is kids are spending less time outside. And this has been referred to generally as the extinction of experience. That term came from Robert Pyle in the early 90s. Kids are just spending less time outside. And there are a lot of different reasons why that's happening. One of them is youth's daily routines are increasingly organized and scheduled. So it's no longer just this free time at the end of the day when you get home. For a lot of kids, they're going to after school programs, they're going to sports, practices, things like that that are really scheduled. Another issue is youth are spending less time outside in general. And that could be because of increased screen time, a lot of competing interests that are taking away from that outside time. And demographically, we're seeing this in particular populations. Girls, Black youth, and older adolescents are spending less time outside than their counterparts. And then another big piece of this puzzle is most humans actually live in urban environments now. A majority of people live in big cities. And in these areas, access to nature is limited and access is also often inequitable. So not everyone has the same access in these places. And COVID-19 really highlighted that. And there are organizations and people that are really working to try and address this issue. Washington State has the No Child Left Inside organization or coalition that's geared at getting underrepresented youth out in the outdoors. And then several years ago, Richard Louv wrote the book Last Child in the Woods. I'm sure some of you have heard of that book before. It's a great read if you haven't heard of it before. And he coined the term nature deficit disorder, which is another way of looking at that extinction of experience. And he shares a lot of statistics and findings that are pretty shocking in terms of the reduction in kids' times outdoors. So I was really interested. I was in grad school when COVID-19 hit, and I was planning on doing this type of research before COVID-19 showed up on the scene. But once it was here, it really provided me with a great opportunity. As someone who spends a lot of time outside, when COVID-19 hit, the places I like to go started closing down. And obviously that varied from state to state and location to location, but it was hard to find a place that was open that I could go and enjoy myself. And I was a new parent at the time as well, so finding places that I could take my kid was hard as well. So it wasn't uncommon to see things like state parks close altogether, or local county parks close, school closures, which for a lot of kids, that's the only access they might have to outdoor time. Also, youth sporting events were closing. So that might be the one way that a lot of kids were getting outside. They went and played baseball a couple times a week, or soccer. And so when they lost that, that really led to potentially a decline in the amount of time or exposure they had to the outdoors. So this was really interesting to me, and I was really curious how that was shaping kids' outdoor time, and was it impacting their mental well-being? So this was really the driver for this research. And it wasn't unusual at that time to see headlines like the coronavirus pandemic, or the coronavirus pandemic is pushing America into a mental health crisis. This was something that showed up in newspapers and popular literature quite a bit. In conjunction with that, there were also a lot of articles and a lot of things that were saying that mental health experts are stressing the importance of getting outside during the pandemic. Unfortunately, people just weren't sure where to go or how safe it was. We didn't do the most effective job at communicating safe spaces. So we saw a lot of closures for some of the places that are likely the safest places to be during a global pandemic, the outdoors. In fact, the CDC actually posted this graphic where they kind of designated what was a good spot to go and what might be a riskier spot to go. And you could see outdoor spaces were really a driver of what was deemed a safer place to go. And unfortunately, a lot of people weren't getting that messaging. And unfortunately, closures to parks were causing parks that remained open, or outdoor spaces that remained open, to be overcrowded and kind of negate some of the benefits of the outdoors. So that was really problematic, and I was really interested in understanding how that was shaping future generations. So I'd like to ask you, was spending time outdoors important for you during the pandemic? Did you experience any barriers to things that you would normally do? Or did you notice that like a difference in your life when you were able to get outside? And you could feel free to respond in the chat. Jamie says it was vital. It was vital for me as well. Working from home and never having a change of scenery was tough. And then going from spending, I would commute by bicycle every day, losing that commute daily. I didn't realize just how powerful that was to my daily well-being. Delaney agrees, completely vital, no restrictions. I know not every place had the same restrictions. North Carolina, we had pretty big lockdowns. I was in Raleigh, which is the capital, so it was a city. I'm in Florida now, and they don't have many restrictions. And I think Nebraska probably had fewer restrictions than other states as well. So, and Jamila mentioned, or Jamila, I'm sorry if I mispronounced that, outside most of it, lived out in the country, so no barriers. That was another factor as well. So a piece I was curious about were people that lived in urban areas more likely to experience these well-being effects than people that lived in rural areas? That was a question I was really interested in. So that does make a difference whether you're in a rural area versus an urbanized area. So yeah, similar experiences for y'all, that these during the pandemic, time outdoors was valuable. So this led to the development of the research I'm going to share. And my main objectives with this work were to kind of explore changes in outdoor activity participation, connection to nature, and mental well-being during the pandemic. So to look at it before and during, and also to explore the role of outdoor activity participation, connection to nature in buffering adolescent mental well-being before and during the pandemic. So what role was getting outside and having this connection to nature playing in, protecting kids from declines in their mental health? And so that's really what drove this work. So we decided we were going to do a study on this, and we were going to survey adolescents across the United States. And we wanted a representative sample. And so when I say adolescents, I mean 10 to 18-year-olds. And we really wanted to do this early in the pandemic when these social distancing guidelines and closures were happening in mass. So between April and May of 2020, shortly after it was declared a global pandemic. And I used Qualtrics to actually achieve this representative sample. It's not easy to get a representative sample. So Qualtrics was instrumental in being able to find people that may have fallen through the cracks otherwise. So just to show kind of how representative the sample was, we were capturing people from large cities, rural areas, small cities and towns, and suburbs near large cities. And we had a pretty good breakdown of those locations. Also regionally, there are regional differences. Climate can impact how much people get outside. If it's the dead of winter, people might be spending less time outside, or the time outside is a lot different than somebody in South Florida. So we had a pretty good breakdown with the South being the biggest group there. And then race also. So we also had a representative sample there, primarily white, but this is pretty representative of our census data. So this was the sample for this study. And we were surveying the parents as well as the kids. So the kids were providing the information, and it was kind of a joint survey where both the parent and the child would fill this out. And so we asked them about their participation in outdoor activities. So how often did you participate in the following activities this time last year and now, after you've been asked to practice social distancing because of the coronavirus outbreak? And we also measured activity frequency. So how often were they getting outside during the week? And we actually looked at several different activities, and they broke down into two groups. And the names here are just names I gave them, but the actual breakdown of the groups is from a factor analysis where we had all of these activities together and we grouped them by similarity in terms of how people responded. And it broke down like this. So outdoor play activities, which are outdoor activities that you can engage in pretty much anywhere. You don't need really natural spaces. So it could just be the street in front of your house or an empty lot or something like that. And then more nature-based activities that really have that natural element. So things like hiking, camping, hunting, fishing. And we looked at these activities before and during the pandemic. We chose these specific activities based on research that I'd done the summer before with interviews. I was interviewing young adults and asking them about the activities that had shaped their environmental awareness and shaped their connection to nature. And these are the activities that kept coming up time and time again. So during childhood, people would participate in these activities, and that led to the outcome of them selecting an environmental major in college or a job or industry that required, time outdoors. We also measured mental well-being, and there are a lot of different ways you can measure mental well-being. We chose to measure mental well-being using what's called subjective well-being. So how people felt directly. It's not us attributing their mental, factors that relate to their mental health. It's them telling us how they feel. And essentially, subjective well-being is a measure of life satisfaction, often referred to as a measure of happiness, and it's a great indicator of mental health. And the actual scale that we used in our survey instrument is a scale that the World Health Organization developed, and it's really great because it can be used with young kids all the way up to adults. So it makes it a frequently used scale, and it fit our survey needs really well. So let's look at some of our findings. In addition to measuring outdoor activity participation and mental well-being or subjective well-being, we also measured connection to nature that I talked about before. And you can see here, the declines are pretty startling. 41% of the people we surveyed experienced declines in their participation in nature-based activities. Those are those activities like hiking, camping, hunting, fishing. 43% of youth reported declines in their outdoor play activities. 45% reported declines in their connection to nature, and 21% reported declines in their mental well-being. If you remember back to the beginning of this presentation, I mentioned that these are trends that persist across the lifespan. So these declines, if they were to continue, could impact people later in life, which is a scary thought, really. So 55% of the adolescents that we surveyed reported declines in their nature-based activity participation. 64% reported declines in outdoor play activity participation, and 34% reported declines in connection to nature. And then 52% reported declines in mental well-being. Only 6% of the people we surveyed reported an improvement in their mental well-being during the COVID-19 pandemic, which is a pretty small subset. Now, if we look at activity scores, we see kind of that mirror piece there. Again, 43% decline in outdoor play, 41% in nature-based activities. 60% of the adolescents reported participating in an outdoor activity once per week or less. So if you think about your daily routine, for a lot of folks, getting outside at some point during the day is a pretty normal thing. But 60% of the adolescents we surveyed said they were getting out once a week or less, which is pretty shocking. 40% reported participating once every 2 weeks or less. So 14 days would go by and they might get outside once during that 14-day period. 27% of adolescents participated once a month or less. So over the course of an entire month, they might go outside and participate some type of outdoor activity once. And that's a lot of people, a quarter of the people that we surveyed. So during the pandemic, people were really kind of locking down and getting inside and not getting outside at all. So connection to nature scores, again, kind of mirrored this 45% decline overall, with 34% of adolescents actually reporting those declines. And then if we look at mental well-being, and I broke this down by race just to show you that it was all adolescents that were experiencing this. It wasn't limited to just certain demographic groups. Across the board, kids were really not doing well during the pandemic. So the stressors associated with the pandemic were impacting them. So it's important to note that we didn't ask kids whether they had been infected with COVID-19. We just asked them about stress associated with COVID-19. And so even not, contracting the virus, kids were still being impacted. And adolescents reported a 21% decline in mental well-being overall. I know I'm repeating some of these numbers just to kind of hammer them in. And again, 52% of the respondents reported these declines. So if we look at the connection between participation in activities and well-being, we can see that individuals that increased their activity maintained about the same level of well-being during the pandemic. So if you were able to do more outdoor activities, and some were, if they weren't going to school every day and maybe they had the luxury of a nice backyard, they were getting outside all day long in some cases. And so they were able to maintain their well-being through the pandemic. If they maintained the same level of activity, that also provided them with the same mental well-being. So it buffered them against those stresses that were leading to declines in mental well-being. What's concerning is individuals that were not able to get outside. And with the numbers I've just shared, you can see that a lot of kids weren't able to get outside as much, and that had a direct correlation on their mental well-being. So the less they got outside, the more their mental health suffered. One of the interesting things we found was participation in those outdoor play activities like riding a bike, going for walks, actually buffered kids through the pandemic. So if they had high rates of participation before the pandemic started, but then it dropped off a little bit during the pandemic, there was a buffering of their well-being because of activities they engaged in before, which is pretty cool. So it's a lasting impact. And then continued participation in outdoor play activities buffered adolescents against the negative impacts or stressors associated with declines in mental health. Then if we look at nature-based activity, we see similar trends here where increases in activity and maintaining the same rate of activity meant that you were pretty much maintaining the mental well-being level you were at before the pandemic. But for those that experienced decrease in their outdoor activity or nature-based activity participation, they also experienced steep declines in their well-being. So we didn't find that pre-effect where spending a lot of time outside before the pandemic had a lasting impact, but we did find that kids that went outside during the pandemic were buffered against those declines in well-being. So I haven't really talked a lot about connection to nature up to this point, and I think that that's one of the coolest pieces because this is something that not a lot of folks have looked at up to this point. So I was really curious, what aspect of going outside, engaging in activities is driving improved well-being? And I mentioned there's a lot of different things. Connection to nature was one of the only ones we could really look at in a survey instrument, but it turned out that it was pretty important. So We know that that nature-based activity participation had a direct impact on mental well-being. So before the pandemic, it had an impact, and then that impact actually went up during the pandemic. So the little arrow there just indicates that it got stronger during the pandemic. If we add connection to nature to this, and we call this a mediation analysis, basically what I'm showing here is that connection to nature is the driver of well-being benefits associated with participation in nature-based activities. This was a significant contributor to those well-being benefits. What's interesting, though, is before the pandemic, the relationship between nature-based activity participation and connection to nature actually got weaker. So it was still a strong relationship during the pandemic, but it wasn't as strong as it was before the pandemic. And the reason for this, we believe, is that a lot of those like pristine type nature locations were no longer accessible for a lot of folks. So they were using substitute nature locations. Couldn't go to a national park or a state park in a lot of cases. So they were going to, you know, an empty lot down the street or a local hiking trail that might not have that extreme beauty or really remote wilderness feeling. So while connection to nature or nature-based activities still drove that connection to nature or that psychological relationship with nature, it was a little bit weaker during the pandemic. Despite that, the relationship between connection to nature and mental well-being actually got stronger during the pandemic. So kids that were able to maintain that connection to nature actually had improved mental well-being. We also saw the direct relationship between nature-based activities and mental well-being increase as well. And this is where things get a little strange. So how much of the relationship between nature-based activities and mental well-being is driven by connection to nature? Well, before the pandemic, 70% of the benefits associated with nature-based activities came from connection to nature. So you could reap well-being benefits just going outside without a connection to nature. But if you have that connection to nature, it really strengthened that and was a big driver for getting those benefits. During the pandemic, though, we actually saw a decline in the amount of that relationship, which was explained by connection to nature. And we think that the reason it went from 70% to 45%, is because daily activities such as, you know, just leaving the house and going to the grocery store or going to school and things like that play a really important role. And when those disappeared, the relationship between going outside and participating in activities and mental well-being provided opportunities to do that. So things like physical activity and social interaction became a bigger deal during the pandemic and strengthened this direct relationship. So connection to nature still was really important, accounting for 45% of the well-being benefits, but it wasn't as big of a driver for well-being as it was before the pandemic, which is really interesting. And so this was for nature-based activities. These are these activities that are really focused in natural settings. If we look at outdoor play activities, we can see we still have that direct relationship where outdoor play activities drove increased mental well-being, and that got stronger during the pandemic. So kids that were able to go outside had that higher mental well-being than kids that weren't. And then if we add connection to nature and look at how it drove this relationship, the relationship between outdoor play activities and connection to nature, and the relationship between connection to nature and mental well-being actually increased, as did the direct relationship between outdoor play activities and mental well-being. And connection to nature accounted for less of the overall well-being effects than it did for nature-based activities. And this isn't too surprising, considering that those nature-based activities are really going to provide that direct nature experience, while outdoor play activities might just be a few trees on a street where you're, you know, going for a walk with friends or something. So still a big driver in the well-being benefits, though, at 32% before the pandemic and then 27% during the pandemic. So we also saw that slight decline during the pandemic. And again, we think that's because participating in these activities was providing an outlet that would have otherwise been filled with just daily routines, like going to school, going to soccer practice, things like that. So when those disappeared, that made these activities even more important. So overall conclusions with this research, these are kind of a brief list. We can go a lot deeper with this, but the COVID-19 pandemic negatively impacted the outdoor activity participation, connection to nature, and mental well-being of adolescents across the board. We really expected to see a lot of demographic differences, and we really didn't see a lot of that. It was really a universal finding for the adolescents that we surveyed that COVID-19 had a negative impact on all of these variables. We also saw that outdoor activity-based interventions promote improved mental well-being for all adolescents. And I think this is a big takeaway here. Getting outside is good for kids. That's not going to come as a surprise to many of you, but having this data to back it up, I think adds a lot of value. And hopefully this will trickle down to policy and things like that and allow us to improve access to nature overall, knowing that it builds resilience in our kids. And then connection to nature is an important driver of the well-being benefits associated with spending time outdoors. For a long time, we've wondered what aspect of going outside is really improving people's health. Turns out that connection to nature piece, that psychological relationship with nature, is the big driver. It's what's really causing people to receive these well-being benefits. And this study highlights the importance of not only participating in outdoor activities and connection, but also connection to nature in general. So maintaining the well-being of our kids is really tied to having these opportunities to get outside and having these opportunities during childhood to develop a relationship with nature. And so that's why things like environmental education are so important. Because in a lot of cases, for a lot of kids, these are their only experiences. If they don't have this type of opportunity at home, maybe they live in a city and they don't have regular access to nature, oftentimes that's kind of fixed through school. They can go on field trips and things like that. So we can do better on that front still, though. So if we kind of apply these findings more broadly, why is this important? Yeah, during the COVID-19 pandemic, it was important to get outside, but on a broader scale, this persists across a lot of different issues. So outdoor activities may actually serve as a proactive means of building resilience to stressors associated with future public health challenges, so potential future pandemics, and also other global change events. And this is really relevant right now as the magnitude and frequency of global crises increase. So there are more and more global crises that we're facing. And as we do, it's really important that we find ways that we can build resilience that allow us to kind of handle these crises and address them head on. So I think the findings of this work can be applied on that front. And if I had to come up with just main takeaways, what is the main reason for this? Spending time outside has the potential to yield a lot of benefits. I've focused on mental well-being today, but it builds appreciation for the natural world. And it's really hard to take care of something you don't appreciate or don't understand. So building those conservation-minded pro-environmental behaviors is essential. But while we're doing that, we're also improving the well-being. So I think that's a really valuable takeaway. Also, improving and promoting access to nature improves these opportunities for youth to reap the multitude of benefits associated with nature. And I think this is a big push right now and something that a lot of organizations are working on. I've actually included a few logos here for a few organizations that are working on this front. The Sierra Club has their Outdoors for All initiative, which is really aimed at getting people outdoors, particularly underrepresented groups that you might not see outdoors as frequently. If you think about, people going outside, in your head, you picture a specific group of people going outside. And so reaching out beyond that specific group and making sure that everyone feels safe out there and has access is important. The Children in Nature Network is doing the same thing with a focus on kids. There's a lot of great resources. If you're unfamiliar with Children in Nature Network, check them out. They have a great website, lots of good infographics and things you can use, and lots of opportunities to learn from the work of others. And it's really effectively presented. So when you get into scientific literature, it can be very jargony. So effective communication of this material is important. Parks RX America, I've already talked a little bit about that, its background in forest bathing. Blue Sky Funders Forum is working on an initiative now that makes access to nature a basic human right. So recognizing it as a basic human right and ensuring that that is implemented through policy moving forward. And then things like Latino Outdoors and Outdoor Afro are working to get some of those underrepresented groups outside and create cohorts where people feel safe and can kind of share those experiences, which is, I think, really cool. These are by no means an exhaustive list of the groups that are working on this, but they were just a few that have been valuable resources to me and that I've spoken with in terms of the research that we're putting out. So future research, this has really kind of driven a lot of other questions for me. So what can we do moving forward to really understand this at a deeper level? One thing that would be great is including respondents or survey samples that are outside of the United States. Cultural differences impact how we get outside and what we do outside. So understanding what this looks like in other places is valuable. Also exploring the dosage of nature required to generate these benefits. Does it take 15 minutes a day? Does it take a half hour per day or an hour per week? Really nailing down what type of dosage is necessary would be valuable, so we can provide metrics to parents and educators to say, well, we should be getting our kids outside this frequently and for this long. And then implementing longitudinal studies that are carried out for long periods of time and follow kids from adolescence all the way into adulthood, and that actually collect moment in time well-being assessments, and also integrating other measures of psychological well-being. As I mentioned, we use subjective well-being in this study, basically a measure of happiness, but there are life satisfaction measures and all sorts of other metrics that are used to kind of measure well-being. And then exploring the role that different types of specific outdoors activities have on connection to nature. So we just kind of had a grouping of activities, but understanding which individual activities have the most benefits. And there's a good chance it's going to vary by individual, but we can tease out some things from understanding what activities are really good versus activities that have less of a well-being impact. And then finally, incorporating qualitative methods. So talking with people, not just doing survey instruments, but getting that rich context, understanding the nuances of these relationships. The numbers can tell us a lot, but actually sitting down and talking with people can be really valuable. And so that's kind of the next step in my book to really make this a more important movement. So these are the future research endeavors that I'd like to pursue. And actually right now I'm working on a study that's looking at the existential threat of climate change. So not the actual impacts at this point, just how people perceive them and how that affects decision-making for young adults and how that impacts their mental well-being overall. So just being concerned about climate change, how does that affect your life? So that's the work I'm really focused on right now. These are the associated publications with the stuff I shared today, and I'm going to drop these in the chat so that you have them. And if someone could just make sure the link works. Hold on a second.
Yeah, and if it doesn't, I will definitely include these in this follow-up email too. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I had a hyperlink here and it looks like the hyperlink doesn't get included. So I'm just going to send the direct link, which doesn't tell you a whole lot, but it will work to get you to the paper. So for me, it was really important to share this material through open access resources so that anyone could download it and have access to it. So often in the sciences, we have things that are behind paywalls that are really hard to get a hold of. And the second paper that I'm posting is the one that really focuses on connection to nature. So I really enjoyed doing this research. It's been really informative for me as a new parent, but also as an educator, and applying these types of things in the classroom is really valuable. So I'm really happy to be able to share this message. And I hope this is something that you found interesting as well. And at this point, I'm open to taking any questions. And actually, before I do that, I should acknowledge my co-authors here. So this was my dissertation, or this was a chapter from my dissertation work. But my committee was really great and kind of guiding me and helping me along the way. So if you're interested in exploring this work in greater detail outside of these two publications, these authors are really great people to look at. I'm pretty sure Amber actually reached out to Catherine Stevenson, my advisor, first. She does a lot of really great work. Dr. Lincoln Larson also does great work. Nils Peterson and Aaron Seekamp. These were basically my committee members. I felt really fortunate to have them, and they're continuing this kind of work on their own as well. So we work together, but we also have relationships with other researchers we're working with too. So I encourage you to check out their work as well.
That's excellent. Thank you so much. I saw one really good question, Brent, that I want to make sure that gets addressed. Jamie asked, can you point to any research on the physiological mechanisms that connection to nature affects, the how of connection to nature? So kind of that,
Yeah.
how is it interact with our nervous system, or in the almost maybe neuroscience aspect?
Yeah, so there's physiological benefits and there's psychological benefits. So a lot of those physiological, like physical pieces, are that increased opportunity for physical activity, and then environmental conditions as well. So Ming Kuo is a researcher who recently published a paper on this. Actually, it wasn't that recent, maybe 2015. And she talks about nature cells or N cells. And I don't know a lot about them, but I can definitely point you in that direction, and I'll find a link for that. But I do want to talk about kind of the basis for that connection to nature piece as well. So there are a few different theories that have been worked on that are kind of the root base for this. One of them is attention restoration theory. And attention restoration theory came about in the early 80s from the Kaplans, Rachel and Stephen Kaplan. I believe it came out in their book in the 1980s called The Experience of Nature, a Psychological Perspective. And it really talked about how our evolutionary kind of beginnings predisposed us to these natural settings. And so when we're in these settings, it allows our mind to relax essentially and wander. And when we're in a setting that we don't have that, maybe in a classroom where we're really focused for long periods of time, this is actually a form of stress in our brain. And we're not supposed to do that for extended periods of time. Despite that, it does happen quite frequently. So natural settings allow our mind to wander and can restore our attention capacity, which is really valuable. And then another piece to that puzzle is stress reduction theory. And that came about from Roger Ulrich in 1991. He published some papers that really focus on this concept of nature's ability to reduce stress. And so those are kind of the papers that have been really, I think, instrumental in driving this movement to understand connection to nature and its value. I'll also say that connection to nature has been used as a metric for a long time, simply for residential outdoor education programs where they want to evaluate the impact. And that's because it's such a good metric for understanding environmental attitudes and behaviors. We're now pushing for it to be a good understanding for mental well-being as well.
That's excellent. Thank you so much. What you mentioned the N cells in the author who's talking.
Yeah, let me find that real quick. Ming Kuo is her name.
Can you spell that?
Mingkuo.
Okay.
And I can actually do better than spell it.
Okay, sweet.
Yeah.
Thank you. Jamie,
no
was that a suffice answer?
That was brilliant. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Great. While you're looking for that link, does anyone else have any other questions? I know I have one, but I want to make sure our participants can.
And just thoughts too, as well. If people don't have questions, I'm curious to hear, what's really benefited you outside. As I mentioned, the quantitative piece or the qualitative piece, really understanding what works for individuals can help us build that big picture as well.
Yeah, that's true. So think about any questions that you have. While you're thinking, I have one, so I'm going to chime in. I'm just thinking about that connection to nature piece and thinking as an environmental educator. Often, we create programs and experiences with outcomes in mind, and many times our outcomes are we want to increase knowledge. It's a lot, maybe it's even more of the old school type of way. And so we're thinking about we need to increase knowledge. And what it sounds to me from your research and a lot of the topics you're speaking to is the number one indicator for even like later on being more pro-environmentally, maybe stewardship values, all these things. Not only that, but also well-being of the child, student, adult for their lifetime is not increased knowledge. It's not increased ecological literacy. It's connection to nature. And this is long-winded, but so what would you suggest for folks in the environmental education field? People might feel uncomfortable. Relationships are very subjective. We don't want to go there. We just want to increase knowledge. What would you say to empower environmental educators to focus on that? Facilitating that relationship should be a priority because it meets the better outcome. What would you say to that?
Yeah, I think we do get bogged down with knowledge and skills that are derived from these experiences. And there's value in that. Obviously, skill building and knowledge building is essential to making those steps. But we all experience the outdoors in different ways. And so for a long time, I used to think, oh, that person doesn't have this relationship with the outdoors. They don't like camping. And that doesn't mean they don't have that relationship. For some people, going out in their backyard under some trees in the shade and just relaxing is just as powerful. And so since it's really a subjective piece, the benefits are subjective as well. So they vary by individual and by experience. So I think just understanding that just because people don't do the same things outdoors that you're trying to get across doesn't mean they don't appreciate it. So really focusing on that effective piece, making sure that people are enjoying themselves, providing those significant life experiences, and not getting too bogged down with, well, they're not learning the knowledge, or they're more focused on playing than they are on actually paying attention to what I'm saying. I think that understanding that things are happening that you're not seeing, just getting
Yes,
outside.
that's really good. And maybe it's more, shifting our mindset to, as environmental educators, being the guides to make sure we're helping facilitate those opportunities for then those people to kind of create their own intrinsic motivation for whatever the connection to nature looks like in that, right?
Absolutely.
I'm
Yep.
long-winded here, but this is really good, and thanks for speaking to that.
Yeah, I see someone mentioned nature journaling. I think
Yeah.
that's a really cool way for people to kind of figure out why they like being out there and kind of express that, and being able to put that down and reflect on it. I think reflection is an important piece. Maybe we'll allow that to hit home for them. It's like, oh man, I went and did this and they made me write about it. And then I realized that this was the piece that I really enjoyed. So I'm going to continue doing that. So I think that can be valuable. I've also seen people use artwork. So, we look at a natural scene and certain things stick out to us. It's different for everybody. But when people are forced to kind of make their own kind of assessment of that, you might see different things. And so everyone focuses on different things and has different values that they assign to different settings.
That's excellent. Thank you so much. Any other questions?
And that last link, I know it doesn't have a title. That's that Ming Kuo paper, and
Okay.
it's a Frontiers paper, so it should be open access as well. And she goes into a lot of detail on the different aspects that drive that mental well-being piece from connection to nature, and she touches on those nature cells that are more physiological.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. And also thank you for not only sharing about your research, but I can tell we just met today, so thank you, but I can tell from you're passionate about not only what you're researching, but making sure it's accessible to people, and making sure that science is accessible so that we can be able to apply this fantastic, these types of findings in the work that we do as environmental educators and in the conservation education world. So I really
Definitely.
appreciate that.
Thank you. That's been something that's been a wake-up call for me as an educator, is that teaching, not all my kids have the same ability or opportunities. And the course I teach now at Florida Gulf Coast University is actually a sustainability focused course. Every student has to take it before graduation. It's like a capstone course. And we do a 4-hour field trip to somewhere in our local community once a week throughout the semester. And then we have an hour and 15 minutes in the classroom, which is really cool. But it really hit home that, oh, we're going on a hike today. I have a student in a wheelchair. How are we going to manage that? So it's really forced me to really understand that and realize that we need to do better in some cases in providing access. So universal design has been something that I've been really interested in and doing a better job with. Obviously, today's presentation, there wasn't a lot of universal design in terms of having alternate text and things like that, but that's something I try and incorporate into my courses.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, thank you again so much. This is excellent. This is a perfect topic, and it left me thinking with a lot of even more questions, which I think that's a sign of a really good presentation. So
Thank you.
I will make sure to send out, I wrote down some of the great resources that you sent, and I'll compile them and send them out for everyone to have that. If they want to follow your work and your continued research, is there a good place, or is it just, are you okay with that contact information, or is there like a platform for your research?
At the moment, since I just switched institutions, I have not put together a new website. I'm planning on doing that. So please reach out through that email. And then if you're interested at looking some of my other work, you can also use Google Scholar and just search my name, and it'll bring up all my papers and research. So a lot of my work looks at science education versus outdoor science education versus environmental education, and what the differences are and how outcomes persist over the long term. So there's some interesting work there. If nothing else, you can just look at the Lit Cited for some of that work and find some really great authors. It's kind of standing on the shoulder of giants essentially already. So thank you all for being here today. This was great. I really appreciate the opportunity to share this work.
Thank you so much. And again, thanks for coming to the Conservation Education Lunch and Learn series. Just as a reminder, next month, September 7th, we're going to hear from our state climatologist from Nebraska, Dr. Martha Schiltz, and she's going to be speaking about climate services and perceptions across Nebraska. So we're going to learn not just about climate change in Nebraska and its impact, but what are people thinking and talking and doing about it right here in our state. That should be a really good one. So be clued in for that. Otherwise, I don't see any other questions. This was excellent. Thank you so much, Dr. Brent Jackson. And I hope to see you again sometime. And have a good day, everybody. Thank you.